Is Boston about to sacrifice Jrue Holiday? What happens when the team with the NBA's most expensive roster suddenly loses its heartbeat? No, this isn't about some mid-season slump or a minor setback. We're talking about Jayson Tatum's devastating Achilles injury, a blow that could derail Boston's entire 2025-26 campaign before it even begins. And as the dust settles, one name unexpectedly finds itself on the chopping block: Jrue Holiday. At first glance, that may sound unthinkable. Holiday was the defensive linchpin of last season's championship squad, a battle-tested veteran whose fingerprints were all over Banner 18. But dig deeper, and a far more brutal reality emerges. The Celtics might have no choice. The logic isn't emotional, it's financial. Boston is more than $20 million over the second tax apron. That's not just a luxury tax, it's a death sentence for roster flexibility. Under the NBA's new CBA, staying above the second apron for multiple years triggers punitive restrictions, like losing access to mid-level exceptions and eventually having first-round picks sent to the back of the draft. Think about that. A team built on the draft. Tatum, Brown, Smart, Robert Williams, all homegrown assets. To risk losing future lottery capital just to keep a 34-year-old guard with declining stats and a $30 million price tag, that's not championship planning. That's emotional inertia. And the numbers don't lie. Jrue Holiday averaged just 11.1 points per game last season, his lowest output in a decade. His defensive rating slipped, his shooting percentages dropped. And worse, he looked tired. That relentless physicality that once defined him now feels unsustainable. If there's a franchise with even murkier direction than Boston right now, it might be the Kings. After swinging big on Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, Sacramento's looking more like a nostalgia tour than a playoff threat. But here's the twist. They just traded De'Aaron Fox. Let that sink in. The Kings no longer have a point guard. Domantas Sabonis, an elite passing big man, has been forced to carry the playmaking burden. That's not just inefficient, it's dangerous. Sabonis is supposed to finish plays, not initiate them. And head coach Mike Brown has reportedly been vocal behind the scenes about the need for a true floor general. That brings us to Jrue Holiday. Kings receive, Jrue Holiday Celtics receive Malik Monk, Terrence Davis, Keon Ellis, Isaac Jones. At face value, this trade looks like a standard star-for-depth salary dump. But don't be fooled. This would be Boston's most consequential non-draft move since trading for Kevin Garnett. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Yes, Jrue Holiday is still a high IQ defender. Yes, he brings championship pedigree. But by the time Tatum returns, Holiday will be pushing 35. His game relies on defensive intensity and physicality, and once those attributes fade, they don't come back. And remember, Derek White already fills a similar role. Cheaper, younger, healthier. So, do you hang on to sentiment, or do you pivot while there's still time to reshape your core? Most fans won't like this deal. They'll call it a betrayal. They'll say the Celtics are selling low on a finals hero. But sometimes, being loyal to the past costs you the future. Is Torrey Craig the unlikely puzzle piece Boston can't afford to overlook? At first glance, the numbers don't impress. A 34-year-old forward averaging under 3 points a game. For most teams chasing a title, that's a name you'd barely circle on the roster sheet. But behind Torrey Craig's modest box scores lies a decision that could quietly ripple through Boston's off-season plans, and perhaps reveal more about the Celtics' identity crisis than they're willing to admit. Why? Is a fringe rotational player suddenly at the center of a conversation about Boston's future? That's the curiosity gap. What does Craig offer that stats won't show? And why might his return be more controversial and consequential than expected? Let's start with what Craig himself said. If it was available, then I would see myself coming back. That sounds polite, almost rehearsed. But then he adds, just being around the guys that previously won the championship, that was a cool experience for me. Notice the wording. Not we, not our championship. For Craig, it's observational, like someone on the outside, looking in, which might be exactly how the Celtics view him too. But here's the shocker. This outsider might actually fit a need Boston hasn't properly addressed. Without Jayson Tatum for potentially the entire season, the Celtics won't just lose scoring, they'll lose length on the wing, switchable defense, and locker room balance. The kind of low-maintenance, veteran presence who won't demand touches, but can plug in quietly on any given night. And that's where Craig steps in, or more accurately, could step in, if Boston believes he's worth more than the sum of his stat sheet. Let's not sugarcoat it. Craig's production dipped. A sub-30% shooter from deep in a league where wings live and die by the three? That's tough. But what if we reframed this? What if Craig's shooting wasn't the issue, but the inconsistency of his role was? Coming off an ankle injury, traded. Mid-season and then buried in a deep rotation. That's not fertile ground for rhythm or confidence. What Craig did show, though, was a willingness to accept whatever role was handed to him and still speak publicly about wanting to return. That says something. That says he's bought in. So the question becomes, should the Celtics buy back? Most fans won't care. Let's be honest, Torrey Craig isn't making anyone's off-season wish list. But that's exactly what makes this story so interesting. This isn't about a flashy signing. It's about strategy, identity, how Boston intends to weather a season without Tatum, and whether they trust depth, system, and culture more than chasing another high-usage wing. There's also a bigger issue lurking. Are the Celtics trying? Too hard to recreate last year's formula in a season that demands something different. Bringing back Craig would suggest they're doubling down on continuity over creativity, that they'd rather gamble on system guys than reshuffle with risk. Some would call that smart, others stagnant. What if Boston misses the playoffs next year, not because of Tatum's absence, but because they overestimated what their championship culture could carry without him? It's a thorny argument. Keep Craig, and you signal loyalty, stability, trust in your locker room. Let him walk, and you open up a roster spot for younger upside or more spacing. But maybe the real gamble is assuming someone else can do what Craig does, without needing the ball, the spotlight, or even recognition. Teams don't lose titles in June. They lose them in August, when they decide who matters and who doesn't, who gets that 12th spot, and why. And sometimes it's not about who scores the most. It's about who holds the team together when the foundation shakes. What if Giannis Antetokounmpo holds the key to fixing Boston's deepest flaw? The idea sounds outrageous at first. Giannis Antetokounmpo helping the Celtics? Not joining them, not playing beside Jayson Tatum, but somehow becoming the very mechanism that untangles one of the most fragile knots in Boston's title ambitions. Here's the twist. This isn't about Boston getting Giannis. It's about using the desire for Giannis from other teams to fix a problem Boston might not be ready to admit they even have. And it starts with Kristaps Porzingis. The Celtics are staring down a financial cliff. Porzingis, a 7-foot unicorn who has battled injuries and inconsistency, now represents more than just an injury risk. He's a cap trap waiting to close. His contract, while expiring, is heavy enough to limit Boston's flexibility. His body, unreliable. His playoff availability, a coin flip. And in a post-Tatum-injury world, the Celtics simply can't afford to carry passengers. But what if his contract, yes, that contract, becomes a golden ticket? Enter Giannis. Not as a Celtic, but as a trade catalyst, a league-altering domino. And Boston smartly could position themselves to catch the fallout and come out stronger. Imagine this scenario. The Spurs want Giannis. Pairing him with Wembanyama would be a seismic move. But Milwaukee doesn't want long-term money in return. They don't want Keldon Johnson's years of guaranteed salary cluttering their books. That's where Boston steps in. What if Boston takes Johnson and ships Porzingis to the Bucks? Now Milwaukee gets an expiring contract they can flip at the deadline or let walk. San Antonio gets their generational pairing, and Boston somehow walks away with a 24-year-old two-way wing in Johnson and clears cap complications next summer. That's not a salary dump, that's tactical alchemy. But here's where it gets wild. This same blueprint could be used again and again. Memphis? They've got too many bodies and not enough spacing. Clark's contract isn't sexy, but Porzingis could appeal to Milwaukee's short-term outlook. OKC, drowning in picks, ready to make a move if they fall short again. Boston could eat a role player's contract while Milwaukee resets the books with KP's expiring. Even Atlanta, desperate for relevance, could send man's long-term money elsewhere. If Boston's willing to help grease the wheels with Porzingis, why would Boston do it? Because they're stuck. They're not under the second apron. They don't have room to maneuver. They can't make impact moves unless they find a way to offload big money without taking back even bigger commitments. And let's be honest, Porzingis has become a luxury they can't afford to gamble on anymore. He was supposed to be the missing piece, but a missing player doesn't help when it matters. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Celtics may need to admit that the Porzingis experiment, while bold, isn't sustainable. Not financially, not physically, not if they want to keep the core of Brown, Tatum, Holiday, and White intact and competitive. But that's just the start of the controversy, because what nobody wants to say out loud is this: maybe Boston shouldn't be chasing continuity. Maybe they should be chasing chaos. What if the best thing the Celtics can do this summer is stop trying to be last year's team and start positioning themselves to be the team that survives the new CBA era? The team that doesn't cling to broken bodies and bloated cap figures. The team that adapts faster, plays smarter, and weaponizes the league's volatility. And Giannis? He might never wear green, but the mere fact that he could be on the move is the kind of market shockwave Boston should be surfing, not running from. Let the Spurs risk it all. Let Memphis and OKC mortgage the future. Boston doesn't need to win the Giannis sweepstakes to come out ahead. They just need to play the margins better than anyone else.